Something happens to certain people before they're even old enough to understand it. A switch gets flipped. And once it's flipped, it never turns back off. If you've ever walked into a room and instantly felt the tension before anyone said a word, if you've ever cried during a movie while everyone else just sat there, if you've ever absorbed someone else's bad mood and carried it home with you like it was your own, I need you to listen to the next 10 minutes very carefully. Because what you're about to hear isn't just an explanation. It's an instruction manual, one that almost nobody on earth has ever been given. And by the end of this, you're going to look at every painful thing that's ever happened to you in a completely different light. Let's start with a question. Why do some people feel everything and other people feel almost nothing? Not in a poetic way, in a literal, measurable way. Some humans walk through life like they're wearing armor. Words bounce off them. Other people's pain doesn't touch them. They sleep fine at night even when someone near them is falling apart. And then there's the other kind of person, the kind whose nervous system seems to have no skin on it at all. Every emotion in the room gets absorbed. Every shift in someone's tone gets registered instantly. Every lie, even a small one, sets off an alarm bell they can't ignore. For most of history, the second type of person was treated like they were broken. Too sensitive, too emotional, too much. They were told to toughen up, to stop overthinking, to stop caring so much about things that don't even concern them. And here's the tragic part. Many of them believed it. They spent years, sometimes their entire lives, trying to shrink themselves down to fit into a world that wasn't built for someone like them. But what if that world was wrong? What if this heightened sensitivity wasn't a malfunction at all, but a function? What if it was never a bug in the system, but the entire point of the system? Stay with me because this is where it gets strange. There's a concept in psychology that almost never makes it into mainstream conversation. It's the idea that certain nervous systems are built differently on purpose. Not randomly, not as some kind of genetic mistake, on purpose. Researchers studying highly sensitive people have found something remarkable. Their brains process sensory and emotional information at a deeper level than the average person's. Where most people filter out 90% of the emotional signals in a room just to function normally, these individuals don't have that filter. Or rather, they have a different filter. One that lets almost everything through. Now on the surface, that sounds like a disadvantage, and for a long time that's exactly how it was framed. But here's what almost nobody tells you. Every prey animal in nature has a predator, and every predator has something that hunts it too, or at least something that can detect it. In human terms, there is a type of person who thrives by staying hidden, who survives by manipulation, by charm, by appearing to be one thing while being something else entirely. And the only kind of person who can see through that disguise is the kind of person whose nervous system doesn't have the filter everyone else has. Let that sink in for a second. The same sensitivity that made you feel too much your entire life is also the exact thing that makes you nearly impossible to fool. But there's more. And this is where the story gets personal for a lot of people watching this right now. If you've lived a life where you constantly attracted people who took advantage of your kindness, if you've been betrayed by people you trusted completely, if you felt isolated, misunderstood, like nobody around you spoke the same emotional language you did, I want you to consider something that might be hard to hear at first. None of that was random. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I'm telling you that your pain was somehow deserved or planned by some cosmic force. That's not what I mean. What I mean is something much more grounded, much more psychological. Every single one of those painful experiences taught you something. Not in a vague, everything happens for a reason way, in a very specific, very practical way. Here's an example. Let's say you spent 2 years in a relationship with someone who slowly, quietly made you feel like everything was your fault. Someone who twisted conversations until you couldn't tell up from down anymore. At the time, it probably felt like the worst thing that ever happened to you. But here's what it actually did. It taught your nervous system to recognize a very specific pattern. A pattern of subtle manipulation that most people never learn to detect, until it's too late. Now here's the part that should genuinely give you chills. Once your nervous system has learned that pattern, it doesn't forget it. Ever. From that point forward, when you're in a room with someone who uses that same pattern on someone else, you're going to feel it. Before they say a single overtly harmful thing, before anyone else in the room notices anything is wrong, you'll feel it. A tightness, a wrongness, a signal that something doesn't add up. And that is not damage. That is data. That is training. That is a skill you paid for in the most expensive currency there is, your own suffering. And it cannot be taught in a classroom. It cannot be downloaded from a book. It can only be earned. Now, I want you to think about every painful experience you've had through this new lens for a moment. Not to relive the pain, but to ask yourself, what did this teach my nervous system to detect? What did this teach me to feel before I could think it? For some people, betrayal taught them to sense disloyalty in others before it shows up in actions. For some people, growing up in a chaotic household taught them to read a room's emotional temperature within seconds of walking in. For some people, being lied to repeatedly taught them to notice the tiny inconsistencies in someone's story that almost nobody else would catch. Each of these is a specific, narrow form of expertise. And here's the wild part. None of these people went to school for this. They didn't study it. They lived it. Over and over until it became automatic. Now here's where this whole thing takes a turn that most people never expect. If all of this is true, if your sensitivity is actually a finely tuned detection system built through real-world training that most people will never go through, then there's a question that follows naturally. What is all of this for? Because a skill that exists but is never used isn't really a skill, it's potential. And potential that goes unused has a way of turning inward. It becomes anxiety, it becomes overthinking. It becomes that constant low-grade feeling that something is wrong, even when you can't point to what it is. This is one of the most overlooked reasons highly sensitive people struggle with anxiety. It's not that they're feeling too much for no reason. It's that they're built to use their perception actively, and instead, they're sitting on it, with nowhere to direct it. Think about a smoke detector that's never allowed to go off, even when there's smoke. Eventually, the wiring starts to malfunction. Not because the detector is broken, but because it was built to do something, and it's being prevented from doing it. So what is the something it's built to do? Here's where we get to the core of this entire video. There's a role that exists in every group of people, whether it's a family, a friend group, a workplace, or even an entire community. And most people never notice this role exists because the person filling it usually doesn't either. It's the role of the person who notices what everyone else misses. The person who senses when someone is struggling before that person says a word. The person who feels the shift in the room when something is off, even if everyone else is laughing and carrying on like normal. This person often becomes the unofficial emotional center of whatever group they're in. People come to them with problems. People feel safer around them even if they can't explain why. And here's the strange part. This person is often the one who feels the least understood, while simultaneously being the one who understands everyone else the best. Does that sound familiar to anyone watching this? If it does, I want you to understand something important. That role isn't an accident, and it's not a burden you were randomly assigned. It's closer to a specialization. Think of it like this. In any functioning ecosystem, different organisms play different roles. Some break down waste, some pollinate, some hunt, some hide. Remove any one of them, and the whole system becomes unstable. Human groups work the same way, just with emotions instead of resources. The person who can sense tension before it becomes conflict, who can feel when someone is hurting before they say it out loud, who can pick up on dishonesty before it causes damage. That person is performing a function that keeps the entire group emotionally stable, without realizing it, without being thanked for it, often without even being aware they're doing it at all. But here's the question that changes everything. What happens when that person finally becomes aware of it? This is the part almost nobody talks about, and it's the part that matters most. There's a stage that highly sensitive people go through, usually somewhere in their late 20s, 30s, or even later, where something shifts. For years, maybe decades, they've been operating on autopilot, feeling everything, absorbing everything, but never quite understanding why or what to do with it. And then, often after some kind of major life event, a breakup, a loss, a burnout, a breakdown, something cracks open. They start to notice a pattern in their own life. They start to see that every relationship that hurt them taught them something. Every situation that overwhelmed them sharpened something. And slowly, a question starts to form. A question that, once asked, can never be unasked. What if I'm not supposed to keep absorbing this? What if I'm supposed to be doing something with it? This question is the beginning of what I'd call the shift. It's the moment someone stops seeing their sensitivity purely as a liability and starts seeing it as a tool. Not a magical tool, not some mystical gift from the universe. A practical, real-world tool that took years to build and that almost nobody else has access to. And once that shift happens, everything starts to change. Not overnight, but steadily. People who go through this shift often find themselves drawn, almost without trying, toward roles where their perception actually matters. Some become therapists or counselors. Some become teachers who somehow always know which student is struggling silently. Some become managers who can sense when their team is burning out before anyone says anything. Some don't change careers at all, but they change how they show up in their existing relationships. They stop dismissing their gut feelings. They stop talking themselves out of what they sense. They start trusting the data their nervous system has been collecting their entire life. And here's something that tends to happen once someone starts trusting that data. The chaotic relationships start to fade. Not because the world suddenly gets safer, but because the person finally starts using their detection system the way it was built to be used. In advance, instead of in hindsight. Think about that for a second. For years, this person could only see the manipulation, the dishonesty, the danger, after it had already hurt them. That's hindsight. But once they trust their perception in real time, they start seeing it before it gets close enough to cause damage. That's not a small shift. That's the difference between a smoke detector that goes off after the house is already on fire and one that goes off the moment something starts to smolder. Now, I want to address something directly because I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. This sounds nice, but it doesn't change the fact that I've spent years feeling exhausted by all of this. It doesn't undo the relationships that hurt me or the years I spent feeling like something was wrong with me. You're right, it doesn't undo any of that. But here's what it does do. It changes what those years mean going forward. Because right now, without this understanding, every painful memory just sits there as evidence that the world is unsafe, that people can't be trusted, that you're somehow defective for feeling things so intensely. But with this understanding, those same memories become something else entirely. They become your training data. They become the reason you can do something most people simply cannot do. And that reframe isn't just a nice story you tell yourself to feel better. It has a real, practical effect. Because the way you interpret your past directly affects how you respond to your present. If you believe your sensitivity is a wound, you'll keep trying to protect it, hide it, numb it. But if you believe it's a finely tuned instrument, you'll start calibrating it instead. You'll start paying attention to what it's telling you, instead of trying to turn the volume down. Now here's something I haven't mentioned yet, and it's important. This shift doesn't happen automatically just because you watched a video about it. Understanding something intellectually and actually integrating it into how you live are two very different things. So let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. Not abstract theory, practical, everyday application. The first thing that changes is how someone responds to their own discomfort. Before the shift, discomfort in a social situation usually gets interpreted as, something is wrong with me, I should leave or shrink or apologize for how I'm feeling. After the shift, that same discomfort gets interpreted differently. My system is picking up on something. What is it noticing? That single change in framing, from self-blame to information gathering, is enormous. It takes something that used to feel like a personal flaw and turns it into useful input. The second thing that changes is how someone handles their reaction to other people's emotions. Highly sensitive people often describe feeling like they catch other people's moods, almost like an emotional virus. Before the shift, this usually means absorbing someone else's anxiety or anger and carrying it around for hours, sometimes days. After the shift, something subtle but powerful happens. The person starts to separate "I am feeling this" from "this feeling belongs to me." They can notice someone else's anxiety in the room without making it their own anxiety. This sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest and most important skills a highly sensitive person can develop. It's the difference between being a sponge, which absorbs everything and gets heavier and heavier, and being a mirror, which reflects what's in front of it without holding on to it. The third thing that changes is how someone chooses their environment. Before the shift, highly sensitive people often end up in environments that drain them completely. Loud workplaces, chaotic relationships, friend groups full of drama, simply because they've never questioned whether those environments are right for them. After the shift, something shifts in their decision-making. They start asking a question most people never ask. Does this environment let me function the way I'm built to function? Or does it constantly force me to override my own signals just to survive? And once that question gets asked seriously, a lot of things in someone's life start to look very different. Now I want to bring this back to where we started because there's one more piece of this that I haven't told you yet, and it might be the most important part of the entire video. Remember the smoke detector? The one that goes off too late because it's never allowed to function properly? There's something else that happens to a smoke detector that's constantly going off in a house that's never actually on fire, just full of cigarette smoke or burnt toast. Eventually, people start ignoring it. They take the batteries out. They stop trusting it altogether, even when there's a real fire. This is exactly what happens to highly sensitive people who spend their entire lives in environments that don't respect their perception. Their alarm goes off constantly because everything around them feels overwhelming. And over time, the people around them, and eventually the sensitive person themselves, start ignoring the alarm. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. It's not that big of a deal. Until eventually, the person stops trusting their own internal signals altogether. They override their gut feelings so often that they lose the ability to even recognize them. This is the real tragedy. Not that someone feels too much, but that someone learns to stop listening to what they feel right at the moment in their life when listening to it would matter most. So here's the real question this entire video has been building toward. What would happen if you started listening again? Not to everything, not in a way that overwhelms you further, but selectively, deliberately. What would happen if, the next time you walked into a room and felt that subtle wrongness, instead of telling yourself you were imagining it, you simply noted it, filed it away? Watched to see if it turned out to be accurate. What would happen if, the next time someone's story didn't quite add up, instead of dismissing your discomfort, you paid attention to it, just a little longer than you normally would? I'm not telling you to become paranoid or to distrust everyone around you. That's not what this is about. What I'm telling you is this: you have spent your entire life building a detection system that most people don't have. And for most of that time, you've been told to ignore it, suppress it, or apologize for it. The shift isn't about becoming a different person. It's about finally giving the person you already are permission to function the way they were built to function. Every difficult relationship, every betrayal, every time you felt like you cared too much, noticed too much, absorbed too much, none of that was wasted. It was calibration. And the moment you stop seeing it as damage and start seeing it as data is the moment everything starts to make sense. You were never too sensitive for this world. You were simply using your sensitivity in a world that never taught you how to use it properly. And now that you know what it actually is, what it's actually for, the only question left is what you're going to do with it.